Have you ever found yourself in the exact same relationship, just with different faces, standing in the mirror of yet another heartbreak, wondering how you ended up here again? Attracted to someone who ultimately brought you the same pain, the same patterns, the same soul-crushing disappointment. You're not losing your mind, and you're certainly not cursed. What you're experiencing is one of the most profound psychological phenomena that Carl Jung, the pioneering Swiss psychiatrist and psychoanalyst, spent decades studying. Jung discovered that we don't randomly attract people into our lives. Instead, we unconsciously magnetize specific types of individuals who mirror our unresolved inner conflicts, our hidden wounds, and most importantly, the disowned parts of ourselves that we've buried deep within our psyche. Tonight, I'm going to reveal the hidden psychological mechanisms that keep you trapped in this cycle of attraction to the wrong people. You'll discover the three primary ways your unconscious mind sabotages your relationships before they even begin. The shadow projections that make you fall in love with illusions rather than real people. And most crucially, the transformative process that can finally free you from this pattern forever. By the end of this journey, you'll understand not just why this happens, but how to break free from it completely. Jung believed that until we make the unconscious conscious, it will direct our lives, and we will call it fate. In the realm of relationships, this couldn't be more true. What you're about to learn will fundamentally change how you understand love, attraction, and the mysterious forces that draw certain people into your orbit. The first hidden mechanism that keeps you attracting the same type of person is what Jung called projection of the unlived self. Deep within your psyche exists what Jung termed the anima if you're male, or the animus if you're female. These are the contrasexual aspects of your personality, the inner feminine in men and the inner masculine in women. But here's where it gets fascinating and deeply troubling. When you haven't integrated these aspects of yourself, when you've rejected or denied parts of who you are, you unconsciously project these qualities onto others and then become irresistibly attracted to people who seem to embody what you've disowned. Let me paint you a picture. Sarah, a successful attorney, grew up in a household where emotions were seen as weakness. Her father praised her for being logical, rational, strong. So Sarah buried her sensitive, intuitive, creative side deep within her unconscious. She became the perfect image of competence and control, but her animus, her inner masculine, remained undeveloped, stunted. So what happened? She found herself repeatedly attracted to emotionally unavailable men who seemed strong and decisive, but who ultimately couldn't meet her emotional needs because they were projections of her own undeveloped masculine energy, not whole human beings. Or consider Marcus, who grew up with a critical mother and learned to suppress his own needs to avoid conflict. His anima, his inner feminine, became associated with criticism and emotional manipulation, so he consistently attracts women who seem nurturing and gentle at first, but who eventually become controlling and critical because he's not seeing these women clearly. He's seeing his own unlived, unhealed feminine aspect projected onto them. Jung discovered that we fall in love not with people, but with our own psychological projections. We see in others what we cannot see in ourselves. The charming rebel attracts the over-controlled good girl because she's projecting her own suppressed wildness onto him. The mysterious, emotionally distant artist attracts the people-pleaser because they're projecting their own need for independence and creative expression onto someone else. The psychological consequence of this projection is devastating. You're not actually in relationship with another person. You're in relationship with your own unconscious contents, wearing someone else's face. And when that person inevitably fails to live up to your projection, when they reveal themselves to be human rather than the carrier of your disowned self, the relationship crumbles. But instead of recognizing this as a call to reclaim your projections, you simply move on to the next person who can carry the same unconscious burden. The second mechanism that traps you in repetitive relationship patterns is what Jung called the compulsion to repeat unresolved trauma. Your psyche, in its mysterious wisdom, will continue to create situations that mirror your original wounds until you finally heal them. This isn't masochism, it's your soul's attempt at resolution. But without conscious awareness, this healing impulse becomes a prison. Every unhealed wound in your psyche sends out an unconscious signal, like a radio frequency that only certain people can hear. If you have abandonment wounds from childhood, you'll unconsciously attract people who are emotionally unavailable or likely to leave. If you have betrayal wounds, you'll be drawn to people who seem trustworthy but have hidden agendas. If you have wounds around feeling unworthy of love, you'll attract people who will withhold affection or make love conditional. Consider the woman who grew up with an alcoholic father, unpredictable, sometimes charming, sometimes absent, always unreliable. Her nervous system learned to associate love with anxiety, uncertainty, and the desperate hope that this time things will be different. As an adult, she finds herself bored by stable, reliable men and electrified by emotionally unpredictable ones. Her trauma creates a magnetic pull toward the familiar chaos that feels like home, or the man whose mother was emotionally overwhelmed and needed him to be her caretaker from a young age. He learned that love means sacrificing your own needs to rescue someone else. So he's drawn to women in crisis, women who need saving, women who are struggling, not because he's generous, but because his unhealed wound can only recognize love in the context of emergency and sacrifice. Jung understood that we don't just remember trauma cognitively. Our bodies, our nervous systems, our very cells remember, and they will guide us toward what feels familiar, even when familiar is painful. Your unconscious mind would rather have familiar pain than unfamiliar peace, because familiar pain feels like safety to a wounded psyche. The spiritual consequence of this pattern is that you remain trapped in the past, unable to create new relationship dynamics because you're unconsciously committed to resolving old ones. You're not available for fresh love because all your emotional energy is tied up in trying to heal ancient wounds through proxy relationships. But the most insidious mechanism of all is what Jung called shadow projection, the tendency to unconsciously project your own disowned negative qualities onto others, then become attracted to people who seem to embody these shadow aspects. This is perhaps the most complex and dangerous of all the unconscious patterns, because it involves attraction to what you most fear or reject about yourself. Your shadow contains everything about yourself that you've deemed unacceptable. Your anger, your selfishness, your vulnerability, your wildness, your neediness, your darkness. But here's Jung's radical insight. The shadow doesn't disappear when you reject it. Instead, it gets projected outward, and you begin to see these qualities in other people. And paradoxically, you're often most attracted to people who seem to embody your shadow qualities because part of you desperately wants to reclaim these lost parts of yourself. The person who's terrified of their own anger is drawn to explosive, volatile partners. The person who's suppressed their own sexuality is attracted to people who seem dangerously sexual. The person who's denied their own need for attention is drawn to narcissistic personalities who demand to be the center of attention. This creates a psychological phenomenon that Jung called enantiodromia, the tendency for things to turn into their opposite. You reject your shadow so completely that you end up in relationship with it externally. The controlled person attracts chaos. The giver attracts takers. The responsible person attracts someone irresponsible. But here's where it gets even more complex. Often we're attracted to people who carry both our idealized projections and our shadow projections simultaneously. They seem to embody everything we wish we could be and everything we're terrified we are. This creates an intoxicating psychological cocktail that feels like destiny, like soul recognition, like finding your other half. Think of the classic attraction between the good girl and the bad boy. She's projecting her disowned wildness, rebellion, and sexuality onto him, while he's projecting his disowned sensitivity, morality, and capacity for commitment onto her. Neither is seeing the other clearly. They're both in love with their own unconscious contents. Jung observed that what we call chemistry or spark in relationships is often the unconscious recognition of our own projections being carried by another person. The more unconscious material someone can carry for us, the more magnetic they seem. But this isn't real intimacy, it's psychological symbiosis. If you're still with me, you might be wondering, is there hope? Can this pattern actually be broken? The answer is yes, but it requires what Jung called the courage to face yourself completely. The path to freedom begins with recognizing that every person you're attracted to is carrying something that belongs to you. The first step in breaking free from repetitive relationship patterns is what Jung called withdrawing projections. This means taking radical responsibility for your attractions and recognizing that every quality you're drawn to in others is actually a quality that exists within you, either as potential or as something you've disowned. Start by examining your relationship history with brutal honesty. What patterns emerge? What type of person do you consistently attract? What qualities do they share? Write down the characteristics of the people you've been most attracted to, both positive and negative. These are your projections made visible. Then ask yourself, how might these qualities exist within me? If you're always attracted to mysterious people, how have you suppressed your own mystery? If you're drawn to confident people, how have you disowned your own confidence? If you attract unavailable people, how are you unavailable to yourself? Jung believed that every projection is an invitation to reclaim a lost part of yourself. The mysterious person you're attracted to is calling you to develop your own depth and complexity. The confident person is calling you to stand in your own power. The creative person is calling you to express your own creativity. The second step is shadow integration, the conscious acknowledgement and acceptance of your disowned negative qualities. This is perhaps the most challenging psychological work you can undertake, because it requires you to embrace what you've spent your life rejecting about yourself. Jung said that everyone carries a shadow, and the less it is embodied in the individual's conscious life, the blacker and denser it is. Your shadow contains not just negative qualities, but also positive qualities that you've rejected because they didn't fit your self-image or family system. Begin by examining what you judge most harshly in others. What behaviors, attitudes, or qualities trigger your strongest negative reactions? These are clues to your shadow contents. The person whose neediness disgusts you is showing you your own disowned neediness. The person whose arrogance infuriates you is reflecting your own disowned grandiosity. But shadow integration isn't about becoming these negative qualities. It's about acknowledging their existence within you so they don't have to be lived out unconsciously or projected onto others. When you can own your own capacity for selfishness, manipulation, or cruelty, you become less likely to attract people who act these qualities out unconsciously. The third step is what Jung called individuation, the process of becoming who you truly are rather than who you think you should be. This involves developing the underdeveloped aspects of your personality, integrating your anima or animus, and becoming psychologically whole. For men, this means developing the emotional, intuitive, receptive qualities that have been culturally suppressed. For women, this means developing the assertive, logical, goal-oriented qualities that may have been discouraged. But individuation goes beyond gender. It's about becoming a complete human being who doesn't need others to carry parts of your psyche for you. As you develop these previously unconscious aspects of yourself, something magical happens. You stop needing others to embody what you're missing. You become attracted to people for who they actually are, not for what they represent. You begin to attract partners who are also doing their own psychological work, who are also committed to consciousness and growth. Jung described this as the shift from unconscious projection to conscious relationship. Instead of falling in love with your own psychological contents wearing someone else's face, you begin to appreciate the genuine otherness of another person. You can love them for their actual qualities rather than for how well they carry your projections. This process isn't quick or easy. Jung estimated that individuation is the work of a lifetime, but even beginning this work creates immediate shifts in your relationship patterns. As you reclaim your projections and integrate your shadow, you stop sending out unconscious signals that attract the same type of person over and over again. You also develop what Jung called the transcendent function, the ability to hold paradox and complexity without needing to resolve it externally. You can be both strong and vulnerable, both independent and connected, both logical and emotional. You no longer need a partner to carry your opposite qualities because you've developed them within yourself. Now let me share with you the most profound insight Jung had about relationships. The people who trigger you the most, who activate your deepest wounds, who seem to embody everything you're trying to avoid. These people are your greatest teachers. They're not accidents or mistakes. They're precisely the medicine your soul has prescribed for its own healing. Every difficult relationship is an opportunity to reclaim a lost part of yourself. Every painful attraction is pointing you toward an aspect of your psyche that needs integration. Every repetitive pattern is your unconscious mind's way of saying, here's what needs to be healed. But here's the paradox that Jung discovered. You can only heal these patterns by fully experiencing them consciously. You can't think your way out of unconscious attraction. You have to feel it, examine it, understand its roots, and gradually integrate what it's trying to teach you. This means that if you're currently in a repetitive relationship pattern, the solution isn't necessarily to leave the relationship immediately. The solution is to become conscious of what's happening. What are you projecting onto this person? What wound is being activated? What part of yourself are you trying to heal through them? Sometimes, bringing consciousness to an unconscious pattern can transform the relationship itself. When you stop projecting onto your partner, you might discover a real person underneath your projections, someone you can love for who they actually are. Other times, consciousness reveals that there's no real relationship underneath the projections, and conscious separation becomes the healthy choice. But either way, you break the pattern. Either way, you stop unconsciously attracting the same type of person because you've integrated what they were meant to teach you. I want to pause here and acknowledge how challenging this process can be. It requires you to take responsibility not just for your actions, but for your unconscious patterns. It asks you to see that you're not a victim of bad luck in love, but an active participant in creating your relationship experiences. This can feel overwhelming, even devastating, but Jung would say this is actually the beginning of your freedom. When you realize that you're unconsciously creating your relationship patterns, you also realize that you have the power to change them. If this resonates with you, if you're beginning to see your own patterns reflected in what I'm sharing, I want to encourage you to start this work. Begin with curiosity rather than judgment. Approach your unconscious patterns like a detective approaching a mystery, not like a judge approaching a criminal. Keep a relationship journal. Notice your attractions. Ask yourself what qualities in others trigger the strongest responses in you, both positive and negative. Begin to explore how these qualities might exist within you. Start developing the aspects of yourself that you've always sought in others. The ultimate goal of this work isn't to become invulnerable to unconscious attraction. It's to become conscious of it. Even Jung, after decades of psychological work, continued to experience projections and unconscious patterns. The difference is that he could recognize them as they were happening. As you develop this capacity for self-observation, your relationship patterns will naturally begin to shift. You'll find yourself attracted to different types of people, people who are more conscious, more integrated, more available for real intimacy rather than unconscious projection. But perhaps most importantly, you'll begin to attract people who are attracted to you for who you really are, not for what you represent. You'll experience the profound relief of being loved for your authentic self, rather than for your ability to carry someone else's unconscious contents. This is what Jung called conscious love. Love that sees clearly, love that doesn't need the other person to be anything other than who they are, love that can hold both light and shadow without needing to fix or change or complete the other person. The journey from unconscious projection to conscious love is one of the most important psychological journeys you can take. It's the difference between repeating the same relationship patterns until you die and actually evolving through relationship. It's the difference between using other people to avoid yourself and using relationship as a path to greater self-knowledge and authenticity. Jung believed that the ultimate purpose of relationship isn't happiness, it's consciousness. Happy relationships are wonderful, but conscious relationships are transformative. They wake you up to who you really are and challenge you to become more whole, more integrated, more fully yourself. As we near the end of our time together, I want to leave you with one final insight from Jung that changed everything for me. The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. Real relationship, conscious relationship, changes you. It doesn't just trigger your wounds for healing, it actually alters who you are at the deepest level. But this transformation is only possible when you're willing to take responsibility for your unconscious patterns and do the work of integration. The person you keep attracting isn't your enemy or your mistake. They're your invitation to wholeness. They're showing up in your life to help you reclaim the parts of yourself that you've lost, denied, or projected away. They're your unconscious mind's way of saying, it's time to become who you really are. So I challenge you, instead of asking, why do I keep attracting the wrong person? Start asking, what is this person here to teach me about myself? Instead of trying to fix or change your attractions, start exploring what they reveal about your own unconscious patterns. The path to attracting different people begins with becoming a different person, not by changing your personality or suppressing your nature, but by integrating all the parts of yourself that you've been unconsciously seeking in others. Your next relationship can be different, but only if you're different. Your patterns can change, but only if you change. Your unconscious projections can become conscious choices, but only if you're willing to do the profound work of looking within. Jung once said that the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. I believe the privilege of conscious relationship is to love and be loved for who you truly are, without masks, without projections, without the need to find yourself in someone else. This is your invitation to break the cycle, to withdraw your projections, to integrate your shadow, and to step into the possibility of conscious love. The same unconscious forces that have been creating your repetitive patterns can become the conscious forces that create profound transformation.